way
Okay,
it's a
okay.
mixture.
Okay, so let me first introduce you, which is the norm here, and then I give you access to sharing the screen. Hopefully I do it all right because it's the first time that I'm hosting. So, okay, so let me first start with the introduction. So, hello, welcome. We have Dr. Zaad Mahmood today presenting on thinking about gig work. Zaad teaches political science, the Department of Political Science at Presidency University. And Zaad has been my friend and colleague for several years. And he has penned one book which came out of his thesis at the University of London at SOAS that came out as Globalization and Labor Reforms, the Politics of Interest Groups and Partisan Governments. This came out from Oxford University Press in 2017. Recently, also Zaad published another book along with his colleagues Achin Chakraborty, Shubhanil Choudhury, Shupurna Banerjee. So 4 authors of this book. This is called Limits of Bargaining, Capital, Labor, and the State in Contemporary India. This book came out in 2019 and was published by the Cambridge University Press. Besides these 2 books, Zaad has also contributed in several journals like Business and Politics, and some have written also some book chapters. He has also been a lecturer at the Oxford Department of International Development from 2017 to 2019. Previously, he had a brief stint at the University of Sydney in 2006, 15-16. And also previously he was a lecturer at Jaipuria College from 2006 to 12. And after all this, Zaad is still the assistant professor. How dismal, how dismal. So this is how you know this whole issue of promotions and hindrances to promotions from several quarters. I don't know how it happens, but welcome Zaad, and look forward to your presentation. Let me check. Let me give you this thing too.
Thank you. Thank you, Modul. Modul, we have a long association um, since our days in Presidency University as student, Presidency College then. Uh, I'm happy to come and deliver my talk. And actually, if you look at the title of my presentation, it's thinking about gig work. And I would ask you to take the title quite literally, because this is me trying to think about gig work. I've been trying to do this for some time. Uh, and I would really appreciate your comments and suggestions in how to frame and shape this work further, because as in the introduction, my focus so far has been on labor politics, capital labor relationships in the more formal sector of the economy. And this is my first foray in thinking about work in a much more sociological, political manner. And so I would really appreciate that. Uh, and my talk is basically it's a little framed a little widely, uh, and I am trying to make 2 points, and I'll put it out now. The first point is that there is a debate about the gig economy and particularly about gig work, whereas economists uh, and, and policymakers have been quite favorable towards this gig work as the new form of employment. It provides greater access to the labor market. It is more flexible. On the other hand, this kind of employment or gig work has been criticized, decried as as taking away workers' rights. So there is a pro and a con debate about gig work. And there is another big debate about gig work, which is about the whether gig work is something fundamentally new, or is it a continuation of the trends that we associate with neoliberal labor market and labor market reforms, in the sense of fragmentation of work, taking away workers' right, uh, employer-employee relationship is curtailed, there is a much more transfer of risks. So in these two debates, I am trying to I'm trying to find answers. So in a sense, there is no I'll be covering a lot of areas. So without wasting any time, I would like to present. Okay. Yes. Continue and yes. Share. Uh, I, you can see my screen, I guess. Right.
Yeah, yeah.
So thinking about gig work, and this is a word jumbled word association that was published in a business newspaper in South Africa. If you Google it, you'll find it. And you have these broad terms, words which are associated with the gig economy: contingent, temporary, alternative, mobile work. And so I'm trying to think about gig work and how do we evaluate gig work, and whether we can think of any theoretical uh, framework. And this is where I would need your suggestions and comments about a theoretical framework which can be applied to understand gig work. So in a sense, a lot has been is being written on gig work, and there has been a very important work which is happening on gig work. But just to bring everybody to speed, that basically when we are referring to gig work, we are referring to temporary short-term work, which is often considered independent contract, or workers are independent. The remuneration structure is somewhat based on piece rate, which we call piece rate or completion of tasks. This kind of work provides flexibility and autonomy, where workers or people who get involved in gig work can choose their work hours, or maybe not. But it does provide a lot of access to people and a variety of tasks for worker. And a fundamental quality of this gig economy is the digital intermediation. We know there are platforms, we know there are companies like Uber, Airbnb, or Zomato, which are mediating this work in terms of gig work. Now, it is important because in the developed economies, in the US, it is estimated that 1 in 4 would participate in gig work or have some experience of gig work. The younger they are more likely to be participating in gig work. But even in a developing economy like India, the gig economy is expanding and it's proliferating. And there are suggestions that due to COVID, maybe this has led to an expansion of this economy. This is from Team Lease, which is another workforce distribution company, provider. They are they show that how gig work has expanded over the years. And interestingly, in the Economic Times, I found this, that actually the general notion that we have, that the people who are associated with gig works are doing non-skilled tasks like delivering or driving cars. But even in the corporate sector, even in the large corporates, professional services, we are seeing the increasing use of gig work in the sense of contractual workforce. Now, of course, we need to tease out a certain difference between the established contractual, short-term contractual work and gig worker, and there, that's why I emphasize on the digital intermediation as one of the critical, and the piece rate. Now, as I was mentioning, there are two debates in, if one goes through surveys, the academic literature. The one debate which I frame, it's that on the one hand, you have this idea of precarity, increasing exposure of workers to risk, lack of employment benefits or regulatory protections. So it is work which makes the worker precarious, Guy Standing's precarity idea. On the other hand, the idea is that it is playboy. It is work which you can do at your own disposal. It is work which allows you to set your routine. It is about flexibility against degradation of work and work rights. Now, here at this juncture, the dominant interpretation in the literature has been that this kind of work has been interpreted as precarity, precarization, precariousness. It is about contingent employment, lack of bargaining power, the denial of social security to workers. However, this idea of precariousness or precarity, which largely builds on the experiences of the developed economies, seems to be quite limited, Eurocentric, because we are all familiar that in India, 90%, very conservatively, of the workforce has always been in the informal sector, denied of all those social security or bargaining powers or even employment rights. And also the idea is that in my work, in my field studies, I have actually done ethnographic interviews, more discussions with people associated with such industry, largely Uber drivers, Zomato delivery boys, where I have found that this work cannot be understood as precarious or precarity. Rather, we should, and this is what I am trying to argue, is that we should think of this work as precarious mobility. And I'm situating this as precarious mobility because speaking to the workers themselves, we must understand that the experience of work is embedded in particular socio-economic condition, right? And from that conditions, many of these workers actually, while recognizing the element of precariousness, considered this work as mobility. So I would like to just quickly read a bit, which would make this point a little more, give this point a little more clarity. So the dominant narrative on gig work veers between the promise of greater flexibility of work, enhanced income opportunity, and improved productivity, and that of disruption and exploitation, where labor is degraded, inequality intensified, employer-employee relation is invisibilized. Based on ethnographic interviews with drivers employed by Uber in Kolkata, or I can't even use the word employed because there is no employment relation, but it is employed in the more generic sense of the term. I find that Uber driving in Global South should be theorized as precarious mobility. The idea of precarious mobility embeds the experience of Uber driving in the specific socio-economic context and highlights the multiple and often contradictory possibilities in gig work. Precariousness is embedded in the structure of work, but the social life of work is perceived as mobility by the people involved. In the following section, I will revert to interactions, more like semi-structured conversation with one of my interlocutors. Let's say he's called Durga Das. So when I asked Durga Das about work in general, he answered, "Ye kaam theek hai." Durga Das had been driving cars for 20 years, beginning as a chauffeur for a private car owner, then shifting to driving yellow taxi for increased income, and finally moved to driving Uber in 2016, when the owner of his yellow taxi cab sold the car, bought a new one, and registered with Uber. When driving yellow taxi, Durga Das used to lease the car from the owner at a daily fixed rate of rupees 350. He was responsible for fuel and kept all the profits. In the new arrangement, Durgadas was entitled to a trip-wise payment of rupees 50 from the owner, who entered into financial transaction with Uber. The owner was responsible for all the expenses and received 75% of the total bill each trip, along with an incentive if the target fulfilled by Uber was met. Uber has offered various schemes over the years, and at present, the car was registered under the weekly trip incentive. The registered car had to fulfill 110 trips every week, divided into 60 trips between Monday to Thursday, for which the incentive was 2100 rupees, and remaining 50 trips had to be completed between Friday and Sunday, for which the incentive was 1800 rupees. Incidentally, I need to mention here that earlier the incentives were 2400 and 2100. So over the years, progressively, the incentive schemes have, the incentive has declined. Durgadas needed to make 110 trips for the car owner to earn the additional rupees 4,500 per week approximately, and to ensure a take home of 5,500. This was crucial as 75% of the total earning from Uber was inadequate to maintain the car, pay for the diesel, repay bank EMI and taxes, and generate profit for the owner. As he pointed out, pehle gaadi, fir malik, fir driver. It was benefit for all or none, as the number of trips ensured certain income for him and assured profit for the employer. Clearly, the driver-owner dichotomy and incentive structure actually shaped Uber work in the city. In order to meet the target, Durgadas worked 12 to 14 hours a day, trying to fulfill the daily target of 15 trips. He left home around 7 a.m., drove till 10, 11, until he reached his target. The duration of work depended on the number of trips, which reflected a new sense of work time. So when I asked him that, how long do you work? His first answer was, as long as it takes to complete the trip. The car owner, who Durgadas did not characterize as his employer, also had the app, which tracked all his routes, stops, and trips. He could log out twice as per agreement, but every time he logged out, it was automatically for a minimum duration of 15 minutes. So Durgadas usually preferred to eat in the car and stay logged into the app during the entire duration of work. Now, the response of Durgadas reflects the vast differences in the materiality and the structure of Uber work in Kolkata. As a global platform, Uber is present in more than 700 cities. It has expanded since then across 70 countries. Uber channels innovation in technologies to use algorithms and smartphones for determining the location of booking, routes, calculates the fare, and even payment. The company publicizes benefits for all, providing cheap rides through utilization of excess capacity in car, encouraging people to drive as independent contractors. The structure of business, despite this claim of universality, is locally embedded. The macroeconomic reality of global south, that is, say, the capital requirement for a relatively new branded air-conditioned car. Uber has a condition that the car cannot be more than 5 years old. The existence of a large informal sector with little or no employment benefit, limited opportunities for decent employment, and socially embedded hierarchy between manual and mental work implies that the material and social reality of Uber work is significantly different in Kolkata. In Kolkata, Uber work is heterogeneous, internally segmented. One can find three forms of relationship: a partner, who is the owner of the car; a partner driver, the owner who drives his or her own car; And finally, a driver who works for a partner against locally determined wage sharing agreement, but the driver also needs to be registered with Uber. This segregation between partner and driver is quite widespread in India. We are all quite familiar with this. The structural difference between global north and south in terms of economic conditions are exacerbated by the specificities of taxi industry, regulatory framework, and the social and material realities of worker. When Durgadas evaluates Uber as decent work, he is not framing it in terms of some abstract normative idea of decent work, but making a contextual judgment. The traditional yellow taxi driver in Kolkata rarely possess the qualities of formal sector employment. The sector is organized along the lines of micro-entrepreneurship without formal employment or social security benefit. Of course, the government lately has introduced some health schemes for people in the informal sector, but the formal employment benefits, which is traditional to the employer-employee relation, doesn't exist. The regulation of yellow taxi industry is limited to the registration of taxi as a commercial vehicle, a taxi driver code of conduct, and fare determination by the state through the Motor Vehicles Act. In contrast, Uber cars are registered as commercial luxury taxi, distinct from yellow taxi, which enables the company to determine fares and circumvent the code of conduct. So here, as we know, Uber drivers don't need to wear the traditional gray dress which taxi drivers have to wear, and they can also circumvent the regulations which are applicable to taxis. Uber in the global north represents an informalization of formerly protected labor relation, while in the global south, it actually represents flexible conditions compared to the taxi in terms of regulatory requirement, but not flexible work in terms of time due to the organization of Uber. The notion of informalization of employee rights do not apply to Uber in Kolkata. It is evident that Uber driving is not flexible employment due to the long working hours, but the remuneration and altered work condition make it decent to the workers. Many of my respondents informed that driving long hours was not easy, but it was considerably easier in the air-conditioned car with the power steering. For some, the ability to dress in regular clothes compared to the dark and dull gray suit that taxi drivers had to wear mandatorily was an improvement. That is why I am trying to argue that precarious mobility provides an analytical lens that transcends the framework of precariousness and flexibility to explore Uber work and through this lens, maybe possibly gig work. The idea of precarity or precariousness has been employed regularly to both describe and to denote employment in the new economy. It reflects the contingent structures of employment, lack of bargaining power, deficiency in social security. Uber work in its productive dimension is characterized by the similar kind of fragmentation, outsourcing of service provision. It is the reorganization by big capital of small capital that aggravates traits associated with self-employment or self-exploitation. So it is precarious in its implicit and explicit dimension. It is the objective conditions of work are quite, one can never say that driving 12 to 14 hours a day for 7 days a week or 6 days a week is something which comes anyway close to decent work. And there is an induced precarity whereby the workers or the drivers have internalized the logic of profit because they understand that unless the car runs, their income is also, so there is precarity in its explicit and implicit dimensions. There is also precarity in terms of ability to negotiate with Uber. So another of my interlocutor, Muhammad Akram, he complained that Uber abhi chorigiri kar raha hai. Uber should deduct 25%, but sometimes it deducts more. I had a fare of 225 and Uber deducted 105 rupees. When I complained, I was told that I got a fair amount. I don't know how. So there is an inequality, and there is some sense, there is the drivers do have a sense that their ability to bargain with the company does not exist, right? And so the narrative of precarity, however, undermines the contextual reality and the subjectivity engendered by Uber driving. The relative stability of income and enhanced income potential in Uber was recognized by all drivers as an improvement. Most of my respondents in their comparative evaluation of Uber vis-a-vis taxi driving pointed out certain specific features which they argued, and they were quite they were quite explicit when I asked them that what is the difference between driving taxi and driving Uber, and these were explicitly stated by them. First, there was an assurance of passenger and calculable income, unlike the trouble of seeking customers in the open streets and insecurity. And this was something that they valued. Secondly, many of the drivers appreciated the absence of haggling over fares and destination in Uber. The promise of incentive, the possibility of surge pricing, and the power of rating ensured that there was a relative absence of disagreements. Third, the difference in work environment reflected in the new air-conditioned Uber car was highlighted in contrast to the old ambassadors. Now, this sense of mobility was not only confined to economic mobility, but extended to the experience of work, which could be argued to reflect social and cultural mobility. Now, social and cultural capital constitutes of resources such as networks of relationship, mutual acquaintances, collection of symbolic elements like skills, taste, clothing that distinguishes one's particular social class. Uber drivers derived a sense of subjective mobility from their association with Uber. Another interlocutor, Kalidas, elaborated when I asked about and this is what he said when I asked about the Uber app. He said, we were trained to deal with mobile and the system. Trip start and drop, collection, training was good, and it happened in Taj Bengal. There are two types of drivers, Dimag Tez and Dimag Bhari, the smart and the dumb. For Tez, it is not a problem picking up the working of the app and the GPS. The ability to use technology, navigating the app, which also involved some familiarity with English, was considered as distinguishing marker by drivers. It represents embodied cultural capital. The basic training provided by Uber during registration involved not only training of the app, but also on manners and effective labor. Naru Bose, one of my respondents, described the process of training during registration. It was hassle-free. I had to register twice, as a car and then as a driver. Then they informed me of the guidelines, how to behave, dress. No short dresses. There should be water bottle. We must give a good vibe, not to ask for extra money or behave badly with customer. Customer should feel you are bhadro. This is a form of cultural capital that is institutionalized, representing abilities and credentials that symbolizes some cultural competence. It is interesting to point out that Uber drivers did not identify themselves as employees, even if hierarchical relations of employment existed. Implicit in their fulfillment of incentive target is a new driver subjectivity that shares the risk of business, internalizing the logic of platform economy. The Uber driver recognizes shared benefit and risk centered around the productive asset. Uber, with its invisibilization of money exchange, non-branded fleet, voluntaristic labor, has a sense of immediacy in contrast to the taxi cab, which by sheer yellow color, marks of multiple use, and aggressively placed licensing document provides no mystification of the social and material relations of labor. So the experience of Uber driving is contextual, contingent on factors like access to resource, labor market, specificities of the taxi industry. Intuitively, the experience of Uber work in Kolkata is distinct from that of London or San Francisco. The literature on Uber emanating from global north, such as Kramer and Kruger, Hall and Kruger, Berger, suggests that Uber provide enhanced economic opportunity compared to taxi driving, which is also valid in the case of Kolkata, but the structure and organization of Uber work is specific. As my respondent, Muhammad Akram, with my level of, this is a point that he made, which was that he argued that with my level of education, I earn as much as the ITI engineer who lived in my neighborhood. The social prestige of work is less, but I am happy with this work. So the narrative of autonomy and choice that dominate global north does not resonate in Kolkata, as the drivers are constrained by the needs of profitability. The improvement in income cannot be separated from long work hours due to the right targets. So in a sense, this is what I am trying to argue is that Uber in global north represents informalization of formerly protected labor relations, while in the global south, in the absence of any social or employment security, it represents some sort of formalization, an altered work condition, and a subjective sense of mobility. However, this does not take away the precariousness embedded in such gig work. And so I'm trying to argue that possibly precarious mobility captures the essence of gig work in the context of Kolkata or global south. And there is another debate, and this is where I'm coming to my second point, that whether gig economy and gig work in this economy is something distinct in terms of its flexibility, its diversity, its access to market, or as critics have pointed out quite persuasively, that this gig work is a continuation of the neoliberal work organization, or if we think of business processes, post-Fordist work organization, which is that there is a contractualization, fragmentation of work, and risk is shifted from the employer to the employees. Now, given this debate, whether gig work represents something unique or something new, given the uniqueness of the economy, or it is a continuation of some trend, what I'm thinking about is that how can we think about gig work? And as somebody trained in trying to locate capital labor relationship and trying to understand collective bargaining and industrial relations, the way I'm thinking about it is that how can we think about work? And we can think about work in terms of five important dimensions. The first is the nature of the work, or the type of work that is being done. Second is that every work has a employment relationship. The third dimension is the conditions of work, that how is work organized, what are the conditions of work. The fourth would be because the social and cultural context of work. And of course, finally, all of this has something to do with organization of capital and labor. So the social and cultural context of work and organization of capital and labor are broader, if not macro, but meso level phenomena. Whereas nature of work, nature of employment relation, work condition can be looked at the firm level or at the level of the worker. So in trying to think about gig work in a broader manner, uh, so if we try and imagine the kinds of work that is being done in the gig economy, and I was trying to chart the number of companies. Of course, these are fewer in India, a lot more in the global north, developed countries. But let's take, for example, Uber, Zomato, TaskRabbit, MTurk, Urban Company. So one thing that largely these are confined to providing either workers or services. Now, of course, the kind of work that they do is that work which can be individualized, work which can be fragmented to an individual level, workers and the tools of production. And in the literature, the work that is being done in gig economy has been categorized into two big categories. One is crowd work, which is geographically untethered work. Uh, you can give proofreading anywhere in the world. Somebody else takes up the work through the platform and does the proofreading. So this is crowd work. And the other is work on demand, the Uber and Zomato kind, which requires the physical presence of worker, which is the tethered work. Uh, Now, crowd work, in a sense, creates a global labor market. Of course, certain barriers do exist, certain racial, social barriers do exist in this global market, but it creates theoretically a global labor market, whereas work on demand creates a much more local labor market. Now, in terms of the employment relationship, work is short term, it is non permanent with variable work hours. Payment is based on completion of tasks. Even if you do gig work regularly, and if you do gig work 9 to 7 or 7 to 12, uh, the point is your payment is according to the task you complete. And there is no employer employee relationship. One is labeled or categorized as an independent contractor, or there is, and so there is a fragmentation and subcontracting which percolates down to the individual level, right? And very correctly, it has been pointed out that all of this kind of employment relationship, what it does is shifts the risk to the workers, responsibility to the workers, and there is no employee benefit or other thing which accrues to the employer. Now, in terms of work condition, what we find is that workers have a freedom to choose one's own job and negotiate one's own work time. And this is the source of the discourse on flexibility. Now, of course, there are, in my interviews, I found there are broadly two kinds of people. One is the dependent, the full time. So the people who relied completely on gig work, who were dependent, uh, for them, the question of flexibility did not exist. However, I've come across people who would work to supplement some of their income, who had some other source of income. For them, this discourse of flexibility did apply. Now, of course, the work condition not only depends on the location of the worker, even the platforms, these crowd work, these platforms also shape the work condition quite distinctly. So, for example, there are some platforms where people upload their work, their task, and and there is a bid amongst the workers to take the task, right? So workers are bidding, that I will do this work for this much cost. There is a bidding. Whereas in others, no such bidding exists. In platforms like, say, uh, even for Zomato or Uber, there is a minimum compensation for the task that is being assured. So the rate is fixed beforehand. There is no bidding happening here. Now, where the gig work uh, becomes quite distinct, in my opinion, is in terms of technology and control. However, we must remember that the use of technology in the control of worker has a longer history. And I would really like to talk about this in the Q&A. So in the gig work, what we find is that control over the worker there is a dual control. One is the market, open market discipline, and the other is technological control. So in the market discipline, all the workers are disciplined by the indeterminacy of work. Work is temporary. Like Durgadas points out, it is the profit, otherwise nothing, he has no employment. So there is an element of market disciplining, which Caliburg calls market mediated open employment relation. On the other hand, there is also this technological control, which is exercised not only by Uber, the company, but also the owner of the car, whereas the owner also had the app. And this creates a kind of an electronic panopticon where there is a real-time monitoring of the driver, or even we monitor where our Zomato delivery person is. Uh, and there is also much literature which is being written about the platform metrics as management by customers, right? So a part of the managerial function is done by the consumer, whereby through the rating system, there is this platform metrics help in that. And there is also this gamified practice, which stimulates a productive disposition. If you open your Uber app, and if you look at your driver, and you will see how many 6 stars or 5 stars the driver has got, and how many 5-star rating, and the driver also sees that. And you can also check your rating, whether it's 4.7 or 4.8 or 4.9. And so it has this sense of like a video game, where you set your own targets, and you're constantly trying to improve on your own scores, which stimulates the productive disposition. So the two important things which have been pointed out in the literature is the embedding of emotional labor in the labor process. So it's no longer that you drive me to my destination, but it is also necessary that you give me a pleasant experience. So, I've often asked my interlocutors, particularly the Uber driver ones, that do they have to speak to their customers? And they said that we generally prefer to keep quiet, but if the customer wants to talk, we feel obliged to talk. We feel some pressure to respond, because rating matters. And of course, there is this invisibilization of the managerial figure. So who is managing the worker is not apparently visible. It is the rider and the technology and the rating score. So while thinking about gig work in a wider frame, of course, gig work mirrors the fragmentation and contractualization that is reflected in the wider economy, which has been called neoliberal labor regimes, post-Fordism. There is a shifting of responsibility for welfare from the employer to the worker. It is reflected in the declining share of value for the worker. It is reflected in more intensification of work. However, I would like to argue that gig work is more than just a fishering of the workplace. Uh, so if we think about gig work, we see that the kind of practices and services that are offered in gig economy, it consists of labor contracting to delivery services, right? And the adjudication, supervision, payment of work, this actually varies a lot according to the platforms. There is a digitally coordinated labor market. It could be global or it could be more local, but this digitally coordinated labor market manages to confound the regulatory structures which are not yet up to date. Of course, many governments, especially in the developing countries, have started responding to this. There is this algorithmic management which employs metrics for allocation and control, which is something we know very little about how these algorithms work. But the most important for me is that there is a blurred distinction between proletarianization and other modes of labor exploitation, say petty commodity production. So nature of work and work employment is quite heterogeneous, and that is why work in the gig economy, it's situated in the particular context of individuals, local labor market conditions, which leads to these contradictory tropes about work: excellent work, new future of work, more flexibility to others. Now, how can we think about gig work in one framework is the challenge that I've taken. And what I am suggesting here is a framework to understand gig work. Now, intuitively, based on the previous discussion, we can say that work depends on the digital platform, the labor market where the particular worker is located, and the labor processes. If these are the three dimensions which help us evaluate and understand work, I'm trying to use three concepts which have been used in the study of labor. I'm trying to bring them together. Is concept of intermediation, subsumption, and labor process. The labor process from labor process theory. Intermediation. Now, work is fundamentally determined by the organization of capital and the given levels of technology. We know that. And so employment relations and the forms of accumulation are at the core of how this work will be organized. Here, the platforms are central to shaping the relations of work. Now, the platforms are central because they are the ones who are connecting the consumer and the provider. In a sense, they create and reshape the market, right? They are changing consumer behavior, they are offering services, and some platforms act as facilitators, whereby you are only used to connect. So you have platforms where providers and owners both publish their requirements and are used for connection, whereas there are platforms which are service providers. So if we are trying to think about gig work, from crowd work to work on demand, which is digitally, geographically untethered to tethered work, it is a continuum. And in a sense, I am quite impressed, and I am trying to use the work of Srinisek of platform capitalism, because it is the platform which ensures that network effect works. For digital platforms to work, you need adequate number of service providers as well as adequate number of consumers. And that is why Uber gave us cheap rides and Uber gave more incentives. Now, once this network effect sets in, then this need goes down. So it is the platform which creates the network effect. It is required, and it is the platform which ensures extraction of value, workers' responsiveness, quality control. It monetizes the transactions through these proprietary softwares, and in a sense establishes these non-standard employment relationships. So the intermediation between the worker and the consumer is done by the platform. And here, we have literature which suggests that capitalism always incorporates a diversity of modes of appropriation depending on the cost of labor and to diminish risks on capital. So if different platforms have actually come up with different forms of intermediation, right? Some operate as market intermediary extracting rent, right? So you are using the services and you pay a small rent for using the services. Some act as shadow employer, exerting control over the entire work process. Think about Uber, right? From your behavior to the route you take and everything is managed. Similarly, some platforms promise transcending local labor market barriers, excluding discrimination, whereas there is literature which finds that even in such kind of crowd work where there is a global labor market, discrimination operates along racial and geographic lines. So there is a particular labor market dynamics which operates within the platforms, and in the platforms, as in the case of Uber, we see that there is existence of both disintermediation as well as reintermediation. And so in some cases, there is a direct connection. So the platforms are not mediating at all. And in other cases, depending on the labor market condition, there is reintermediation, right? Think about the relationship between Uber and the person who's driving the car in Kolkata, and the intermediation by the owner, cab owner, non-driver. So the intermediation is not disembedded from the local economy, and there is a divergence between the developed and developing economies. The idea of subsumption, the classical Marxist idea of subsumption, is the extent and forms of appropriation of surplus value. However, thinking broadly, we can think of subsumption as how the worker is incorporated in the production relation. So at one level, it can be understood through participation. As I was mentioning, whether somebody is completely dependent on gig work, full-time, or it is supplementary, part-time. Similarly, in gig work, given that there is so much importance of algorithm and data, there is some sort of self-reinforcing datafication, right? So every action that we do as participants in the gig economy, as gig worker or as consumers, becomes a part of the data. And that data eventually is analyzed through complex algorithms, and it creates future opportunities or limits future opportunities. So there is a self-reinforcing datafication, which is also happening in this subsumption. Now, going back to the classical Marxist understanding, subsumption can be of two forms broadly. One is the formal subsumption, where there is an extraction of absolute surplus value, right? This is when capital is unable to increase productivity and drive down necessary labor time. So what happens is there is an absolute, whereas once capital is able to control labor process with technology and its ability to surveillance, it can increase labor productivity, and then real subsumption comes in. This is the traditional understanding. Now, here in the gig economy, what we're finding is that there is a mixture, there is a hybrid form of subsumption in terms of surplus. If you think about it, the wage relationship, the trip-wise wage relationship that exists between Durga Das and the cab owner, and the income sharing relationship that exists between Uber and the cab owner, one represents a form of real subsumption, appropriation of relative surplus value. Uber takes 25% of all the trip value, whereas when it comes to the relationship between the cab owner and Durga Das, there is a much more formal subsumption which is in operation. And across gig platforms, we can see these multiple forms of subsumption operating. So finally, the labor process. And here I am borrowing on the entire literature on labor process theory and others. But quickly, what I'm trying to argue here is that in gig economy, there is this element of algorithmic management and control, right? Which replaces the traditional organization through bureaucratic control. And this algorithmic control is pivotal because it allows for both flexibility and control. And I think labor process theory, because it allows consent, autonomy, exploitation, all to get to analyze them together, I think labor process theory is very well suited to understand this, the labor process in the gig work. Now, as I said, there are three major things. One is the real-time monitoring, the other is the platform metrics, and finally the gamified practices. Now here again, across platforms, we see that the control over the labor process varies quite significantly. In some, control is exercised at the end, as the end product. There is a quality check, but whether the end product passes the quality check or not. And in some other, there is a minute and detailed control over the work process. So if we are to think about the gig economy, and if we want to understand how can we evaluate or how can we theoretically understand gig work and its quite contradictory evaluation, I am proposing the interaction of these three ideas: intermediation, subsumption, and labor process. And as you can see, within intermediation, I'm saying there are two levels at which we can think about it. What is the nature of intermediation by the platform? And of course, it is associated with, but analytically, I want to make a distinction, is the nature of work. Similarly, when it comes to subsumption, I'm thinking about participation in terms of time as well as in terms of resources. And another dimension is how is surplus being extracted in the process. And finally, when it comes to labor process and regulation of worker, I'm thinking about at the one level, we have regulations, and there is a labor market. There are laws of the labor market, formal and informal, and there is algorithmic regulation. And where is this regulation being applied? Is it applied throughout the work process, or the regulation is being applied or control is being applied at the end of the process? And so intermediation, subsumption, and labor process, by incorporating all these three concepts which have been used in the understanding of work and labor, but in bringing these together, I am trying to argue that this provides us with a framework to explain this multitude of work which occupies gig work, right? And I'm also trying to argue that gig work is not a simple neoliberal restructuring of the labor market. Of course, there are features which are quite neoliberal: market-mediated open contractualization. However, the hybrid forms of subsumption, the datafication, the new forms of technology and control, these are something which make them distinct. I'm still not clear whether how to really locate it. So the basic idea that I'm saying is that the embeddedness and disembeddedness of work in the gig economy, where the platforms and the workers are simultaneously embedded and disembedded, creates this new world of work which we need to understand. And that is why we can see that in the gig work, it has been evaluated differently by different groups, socioeconomic contexts, geographies. It has certain positives like overcoming labor market barriers, and of course it endows with autonomy, and it has low pay, unsocial and irregular work hours, and finally, there is a complication between the proletarianization and petty commodity production. And that is why I'm suggesting, I'm not suggesting as of yet, but I'm hoping that you can help me bring this together about this framework to evaluate gig work. And I'm also thinking about, and this would be something that I look forward to your comments and suggestions on how to distinguish gig work, not as something understandable through the framework of neoliberalism, but something more than neoliberal. Thank you so much, and I'm done.
Thank you. Sir, can you just
I will
yeah,
stop the screen share.
yeah, and
Just give me a second. I hope the screen sharing has stopped.
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so thank you very much. And this is the kind of work that Zaad has been doing for some years. And this is something which is a continuation of his earlier work on political economy and political economy of reforms, with interdisciplinary subject called development studies, where actually Zaad contributes. And he is also an associate editor of Oxford Development Studies, which we call ODS. So any one of you who are interested to send papers to ODS, Zaad is the person to contact.
I welcome everyone. I welcome everyone because we are trying to expand the representation from the global south, because it is about global south, but dominated by global north. So I welcome everyone.
Correct. Okay, so questions, comments, suggestions are open, and it's welcome. So please unmute yourself and you can ask question and comments. And possibly if you can also stop your video so that we can also see your faces and body language, if you want.
Mr. Moidul, can I start with a question? This is Priya.
Please, Priya. Yes. Please.
So, Zaad, first of all, thank you for a very interesting presentation. The kind of complex there's a lot of food for thought. It's not something that we react immediately, but just a couple of.
Couldn't hear Priya. She's.
I think Priya's network internet connectivity. She has this problem. Yes, now Priya is back. Hello, Priya.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Yes, now we can hear you.
Okay, yeah. So I'm just putting my video off because I think that is kind of messing up the. So, you started with this idea of precarious mobility, and there was some explanation about the mobility. Drivers themselves, but what about whether there is a conceptualization of mobility to something else, as in, is this then seen as a stepping stone to something else? Okay, and the reason I'm asking is, because when you think of mobility, it always would be sort of directions, and so this is one point, and so this is also then related to the fact that the kind of service that is provided, so the product itself, it's a particular kind of service which has come into increasing demand in recent years, but one does not know how long this demand will last and whether it will take on kind of newer forms. Okay, And so the mobility might also be desirable in that. But what I also want to raise is, so a lot the framework that you presented, especially towards the end, in terms of how does one think about gig work beyond neoliberalism, and I completely appreciate that attempt me to think much more about all those categories. So can one distinguish more carefully between the kind of contractualization in flexible economy within sort of your products, more conventional kind of industrial products, versus various kinds of services, to see what is there something, what is it that is what is inherently different about the nature of the commodity that is being sold, which kind of enables these changes, and even within services about different kinds of services and the kinds of commodities that they represent. So, driving and getting from one place to another is one kind of service, but say somebody providing at-home medical service, in which there is a whole sort of, economy that is there, which is part formal, part informal, where the level kinds of skills required are of a different order, would that then, where there is sort of the kind of app intermediation, that technology intermediation that you were talking about would be different, would that then dramatically change your argument about the nature of labor and capital kind of interface? So, this point that you had is, in terms of components of work, the very first one, the nature of work. So the nature of the product itself, if that is something that can be kind of used to think, about the distinction between different kinds of work, and therefore about, the kinds of relations of labor that they give rise to. Okay, so this is sort of just thinking aloud, and I want, I have many questions actually, but I'll stop at these two and let other people kind of have their say. Thank you.
Do you want me to respond, or should
would you mind to respond now, or or take questions?
I can respond to Priya. I'd be happy to, because these are big questions and I ended up with questions. So first of all, Priya, thank you so much. I didn't get your first question because of the internet thing, but what I could gather is that if I am arguing about some sense of mobility, mobility to what? I didn't get chance to elucidate, because I am grappling with the categories now, and one of my respondents argued when I asked this question to all of my respondents, that would you like your children to carry on this work? And all of them said no, and they had many reasons about the lack of respect and the backbreaking work and other things which they argued. So in a sense, none of these people, and I'll have to go back to my transcripts, but whatever I could remember, none of these people perceived this as something they could do for long, because it was backbreaking work, driving 14, 15 hours a day. It was akin, as if many of them had plans to shift to business once after they could not do anything. Some of them said they were forced to do this because they did not have any other avenue. But this is an important question. My sense of talking about mobility was about this subjectivity, where I asked this question to everyone, that what would your Malik say? Where it was triggered to see whether the car owner was considered as Malik, and most of them did not identify him as the Malik. So there is this sense whereby they thought they were autonomous and independent. Of course, they realized that this independence and autonomy is quite precarious. They realized that if they did not go out to work, or if they did not fulfill the trip targets, possibly this entire employment and good wages, everything comes crumbling down. But they had this sense. And so that kind of new worker subjectivity is something that I'm trying to capture. So I'll think a little more. I don't know whether I'm answering your question or not, because I could only hear half of it, and I constructed in my head. I completely agree with you. I agree with you that it is the nature of commodity, and it is the kind of work and what kinds of work are amenable to crowd work, what kinds of work are amenable to work on demand, uh, where can, at the end of the labor process, one can apply these kinds of quality checks and controls, or does it have to be over the entire period of the work? But I am hinging my entire argument on the idea of subsumption, at least till now. And of course, I need to think more carefully. Possibly it will be a good idea to actually list out all the gig platforms, and we have many, and then try to see what kind of services or work they are doing, and then putting it together here. Something that I'll keep in mind. And the nature of work is important, and that has some bearing to what extent the work can be individualized, can be subcontracted, or can be given flexibility, or control can be exercised. But still now I am more focused, because what got my attention was this, that as technology, if we take Marxism and the idea of relative and absolute surplus, if technology allows control over labor, it makes more sense for capital to go for real subsumption, because you can increase productivity. However, here we are seeing a mixture happening, which has been pointed out in the literature on neoliberalism also. But even if you think about contract workers, right? So I did work on the formal sector. Even in the contract workers, even though their work is temporary and contractual, they are subject to the same kinds of discipline and management and the entire labor process as the formal workers. They are more precarious. Here, the kind of control as well as the forms of subsumption are kind of different. This is what I am trying to point out. Oh, I'm done. I'm done. I'm not thinking. I'm done.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Any more questions, please? We have lots of time for discussions. And you can ask even naive questions. You don't have to be specialized.
If nobody has questions, then I'm going to ask questions. Because sorry, yes.
Prachi has a question. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you. I really enjoyed your talk. And I kept sort of, waiting, I guess, while you were describing this kind of worker subjectivity that is the sort of expectation when you are listening to or reading this kind of work, to come up with some sort of assessment of what in an earlier time would be called false consciousness. That somehow there is a system that is sort of, for lack of a better word, duping people and sort of giving them false promises of these incentives and so on. And I appreciate that you're actually sort of trying to find a middle ground between them and come up almost with what seems like a kind of ground up entrepreneurship. And I'm wondering if you would call them entrepreneurs of a kind, so even if you set up a shop or something, I mean, there is a very clear understanding of the hard work that is involved. Even if you're setting up any kind of new enterprise. And so that is one thing that I wanted to ask you, like if you're using the word work instead of labor, and so that these drivers are, so what are the kind of slippages between these different terms, that might help you kind of flesh out this subjectivity, labor, work, entrepreneurship, worker. I don't know how many more you could come up with, and how much of this is ultimately going to fit into a narrative of exploitation, because this is ultimately an extremely kind of unequal system, right? The other thing about uniforms, I was curious. I mean, there is a certain branding that happens with the Zomato drivers or the Swiggy guys, and so I was wondering, I mean, they too are gig workers, and if you were to actually ask the question about uniform elsewhere, would you sort of come up with different answers as well? I know towards the end you did address the idea of how this is a very elastic and in a sense difficult labor economy to actually describe, since it has so many different kinds of things. But that struck me that they don't have to wear uniforms, and so do people who work for Zomato and so on, or even those who work for Spencer's and other places, and they have to wear that uniform, which in earlier, say in smaller shops, people don't have to, if you're like showing sarees to somebody, you don't have to actually wear it. But then you have to then embody that brand. And I don't know whether they can see through, or whether they engage with the idea that your body is also being turned into an advertisement board, and in the name of being part of the CCD family or whatever. And so how then would those kinds of questions also allow you to explore these subjectivities in different ways? But it was a very thoughtful paper. Enjoyed it very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Prachi. Thank you so much. First of all, okay, I have a confession. The confession is that I am using the category of subjectivity, but I am quite cautious here, given my lack of training or engagement in the sociology of work. This is the first time I'm foraying into something like this, and yes, there are these categories which I have to think more carefully about entrepreneurship and work. And but I do have this is something that I don't have an answer as of yet, but you have given me something to think about more carefully. But I do have the answer to your second question, and that is quite interesting, although I didn't get a chance to really reflect on this. I did ask some of them, right, about the uniform, because the Uber drivers distinguished themselves from the taxi drivers, and they had a lot of one of the features was that so okay, when I asked Uber drivers, I asked all of those people that what did you do before, and how do you evaluate your this present work with what you did previously. So the ones who came from taxi, they would say that the passengers are better, the riders are better here. The one word which came across quite often was कि taxi में कचरा है, Uber में कचरा कम है. And by this entire one word, what they were trying, at least 3 or 4 people used the word kachra, and that's why I remember it so vividly. What they were trying to say is that on interrogation, they argued about the haggling, about the police and the harassment by the police, because they couldn't park in places and they would get police cases. Here, they don't have to do that. They could just go and pick. And so there was a number of things, and the dress was one of them. And here, this is my take on it. When I asked the same thing to there is one food delivery thing. It's a very small Uber food delivery thing which is happening here. And you see them wearing the t-shirt, Rebels, R-E-B-L. There is a small group, and I had a chance to speak to them. The bigger ones don't have time. So I asked them about this branding thing. Now, at one level, I find that wearing a uniform which is socially aspirational or socially valued is something which they like. On the other hand, when the uniform represents something, and that is why I think in order to tease out this mobility, I need to work a little more on the distinction between not only manual labor and intellectual labor, but also the various categories or classes of worker and the distinction between them. So when it comes to taxi driver, not wearing the uniform becomes a criteria. But when I was speaking to these boys who were wearing rebel t-shirt, and they have to wear, all of them have to wear rebel t-shirt, and I asked them, how do you feel about this, that you have to wear this rebel t-shirt? And he says, this gives me an identity. You see me and you can understand that I represent rebel and I have brought your food. I don't have to, it's like, it gives me access. So there are, thank you for that question, because there are, it is not about whether wearing dress or not wearing dress. That is the important dimension. The important dimension is, what does the dress represent? Whether it makes me a part of a community which I look up to, or which gives me access to social and cultural spheres which I look up to, or does it make me part of a community which I look down upon? I think that, let me write that down also, because it is important to think about it.
So I have a brief follow-up comment, if I may, after you're done. Right.
I would just mention this only little bit, because there is some other work Nandini Guptu has done, where she points out that women security guards, they actually loved the uniform that was being provided to them, because that uniform represented a kind of access to a certain male-dominated sector, represented autonomy, represented certain power to stop cars. So I can see how it is also, again, another contextual. Sorry, please go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, we had a PhD student a while ago at the center. He unfortunately didn't complete it, but his work was on the relationship between work and nationalism for the early 20th century, and a sort of culturally, socially derived discourse about work, And so I was wondering, perhaps, he was interested really in how a certain middle class morality develops around the idea of hard work and bodily sort of investment in various sorts of social initiatives and practices and so on, and then kind of bleeds either into Gandhism on the one hand or Hindutva on the other, and so on. But more, that's where my question was also coming from, about how calling something work may perhaps indicate more agential investment, entrepreneurial investment in something, as opposed to labor, which might indicate something that is imposed, something that gives less maneuvering room. And so I think riffing on some of these semantic, they're seemingly semantic, but they're actually, I think, ways in which you can expand on this subjectivity. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yes, may I ask a question, please? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, please.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I'm Professor Arundhati Ray, and I found this chapter to be very, very unique. And thank you, Madhur, for giving us this opportunity to hear about these great taxi drivers which are all over the roads. However, somehow I would like to ask the speaker, being a lady, I'm now maybe shifting gears a wee bit. Ever since the Sadaji drivers left Calcutta, I find it very fearful to get into one of these cabs, because after having seen their track records, especially even during the daytime or at night, uh, it holds me back for getting this transport to bring me home. I would rather travel perhaps by an auto or a rickshaw. Now, what is the future of this kind of cab business, some private cab business, as you described so beautifully and articulately? However, that fear element in women will always be there, and there have been so many cases, especially even during the pandemic time, where a lady had to sacrifice her body part to save a young girl near Ruby Hospital. So these are very, questions of big concern for us ladies, females, if you may say so. Yes, please. Would you have a word? The future of these cabs and the safety values attached to it. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think, so there are two questions here. One is about women's safety and the cabs. And the second one would be about the future of the taxi industry, which consists of traditional taxis as well as Ubers. So I have also, as part of this research, I have also done some, I have not presented this here, I have also done some consumer or rider surveys. So around 400 surveys of people who use different kinds of cabs and different mediums.
Yes.
One thing that I have found here, and that is quite explicit, is that women are increasingly tend to prefer these kinds of app cabs because of a certain sense of security. So they have their car numbers. Now they have introduced SOS buttons, and the most important thing that people have pointed out is the ease with which they can get access to cabs. So you don't have to walk down an empty street or a packed street trying to wave every passing taxi to see whether they will go or not. It is much more convenient. So I think in that sense, I think the app cabs provide, at least give a sense of security. When I asked the drivers which were the most busy times for them, the answer was Saturday, Sunday and Friday. And Sunday, because most of the drivers who are employed for private cars, they either have holidays, or Sundays are the days when people take out their families, and Friday nights because it is the Friday night end of the work week. So there is an association that we found or we see, but I can't really generalize because it's only 400. It's not a representative sample, but women tend to prefer app cabs because of the sense of security.
1 minute, may I just interrupt your word security, right? Now, when you get into these app cabs, the driver immediately locks you inside. He's got switches that lock you inside. So where is the security element? I can't get out. Even if I scream, nobody can hear me.
I do accept the point you're making, but when we are, this was a large, as you can see, 400 people. So it was a questionnaire. And when we asked what was the reason, so we give them options. What would you choose? And many of them chose app cabs. And one of the reasons that they pointed out was that you had all the details. So when you book a cab, you get the driver's name. Of course, there are these incidences where somebody else is driving on behalf of somebody and things happening like that. But you get the name, you get the car number, and this itself, all the information, and that you can pass on this information to anyone you want through the mobile phone, gives a sense of security. And the points that you are raising are absolutely true. These cars are more advanced. They have 4-door automatic power lock. So the driver can lock you inside. and there have been incidences, but I guess the three things which women pointed out, at least I can remember, but I can be wrong. I'll have to go and check all the survey responses. One was that the the pick up and drop happened from location to location, which gave them some confidence. Secondly, all the information about the driver and the cab was available to them. And thirdly, that they could avail or get the cab sitting at the security of where they were. They didn't have to walk down the street trying to hail cabs. Uh, as regard to the taxi industry, so as part of this, I also interviewed some taxi drivers because I wanted to understand what was the other side of the story.
Yes.
And I will tell you, one taxi driver told me that he's never going to drive Uber. And he used the word gulami hai, slavery. He used Uber. He said he's never going to drive Uber. Wo to gulami hai. It is slavery. And he pointed out that he had, if it was flexible and autonomous work, he was more flexible and autonomous compared to the Uber driver who had to do the bidding of the company, the bidding of the car owner, and the bidding of the passenger. He said, I don't have to do bidding of anyone. If I don't like a passenger, I can just simply refuse. If I don't feel like working, I know that, okay, I have earned 100 rupees. That is good enough for me. And I can just pack up and go. He pointed to me that in the afternoon, he made sure that he rested for half an hour to 1 hour. So there is a big constituency, I won't say big, but there is a group of people who have a different outlook whereby they are not driven by the productive, more income-oriented, acquisitive nature, but who value their autonomy in that sense. Of course, now the condition of Uber is really, really bad. It is bad because what has happened is the incentives that were being offered has progressively declined, particularly after COVID. Mm-hmm. And so what that has meant is that there was a class of people who had bought cars, listening to stories how you could earn up to 1 lakh per month by driving Uber. Now the story has changed significantly. And the only ones who are making a living out of Uber are the ones who are self-owner and driver. So what has happened, because I live in part of Kolkata called Khidirpur, here there is a lot of taxi drivers, a lot of informal sector people. And here I get a lot of taxi drivers who are driving for Uber. And what they are pointing out is that the one who's most distressed by the present development is the car owner who doesn't drive. Because the financial obligation for making the EMI payments, maintenance of the car, fuel for the car, all lies with the car owner. The driver is driving 50 rupees or 60 rupees per trip. And so the driver may not earn something, but the driver has no liabilities. Much of the liability lies with the car owner who is not the driver. And so I do not see, there was a point in time, I have the data, actually after 2014, one can notice that registration for taxi car takes a steep decline. Registration for luxury car just shoots up like anything. But today, I think we are in a situation where people are again reevaluating. I don't see the yellow cab disappearing unless all the ambassadors actually break down, which will happen after some time. But there will always be this traditional taxi sector. But it is without a doubt that the Ubers and the Olas are the ones which dominate the sector. There are more Uber and Ola cars today than yellow taxis. So that shift has already happened in the taxi industry, whereby the traditional taxi industry has become a marginal player, and these big corporate owned taxi services are the major players in the taxi sector.
Are you considering some research on the drivers? You know, we need research of the male drivers going to their, you know, psyche or whatever, you know, some kind of questionnaire to assess what are they all about, what are their qualifications, what are their capabilities, their skills, their interests, you know, proper research, and get some feedback for people like us who are concerned.
Most of the drivers that I have spoken to actually, and this is something which marks us, at least the Kolkata Uber drivers, makes them distinct from whatever we have in the literature. Because if you look at the literature emanating from, say, the African countries or the literature from the global north, even many people have been lured to driving Uber for greater income, and that has been noted everywhere. In Kolkata, most of the drivers that I have come across, barring one, there was only one person, and I can talk about that person. Most of the drivers actually came from the driving sector. Either they were driving taxi, or they were driving small matador, or driving some kind of van, and they came from the driving sector, which I have, because my sample is not really representative and it's a snowball kind of thing, I can't really generalize, but my hunch is that the strongly entrenched sense of the difference between manual and a non-manual intellectual labor that is so well entrenched in this in society, that driving itself is not something, even when the prospects of earning were very good, not many people who you would generally classify as middle class went into that work. This is not the experience what we see if we read literature coming out from Nigeria, right? Where many young graduates who were looking for office jobs take a loan, buy a car, and get into this industry. Here, that phenomena has happened, but that has happened largely amongst a group which has some familiarity with the driving industry. I only found one person who was working for a company in Jharkhand, and he comes from a middle class background. The work, because he was working in a factory in Jharkhand in some kind of foreman position, he had to be away, so he had to come back to Kolkata, and he had started driving Uber. That was only the one case where there was no direct association with somebody amongst friends or family who is into the driving industry or in the taxi industry that came about. But again, my samples are snowball. They are not representative, so I can't make any big claims on that kind of a relationship.
And one last, before I spoken for a long time, and you've taken a lot of time to explain also. Very grateful for that. No, what I noticed
can you just
in the
open your
United
video?
States,
Can you just open your video?
No, I don't want to, please. I just want to, my last observation is because of unemployment among students, I noticed in the United States of America, every time I visited, that students on campus do off-campus jobs and earn money which helps them to pay their fees, college fees, engage in driving. Even in the middle of the night, I've been driven by young girls, 19-year-olds, my heart would sink. Good Lord, it could be my daughter. But no, they were so brave, and what commendable work, working off campus, earning money and contributing that towards their education. What would you have to say?
I'd say we have a different social setup where until I managed to get my first job, my parents took care of me, and even today they're taking care of me in a certain sense. This I agree with you completely, and this segregation of work and the certain values which are strongly entrenched in
dignity of labor,
and the question of lack of dignity of labor in our society, and certain values which associate which lead to this kind of distinction. I completely agree with you. And that gets reflected in who are the drivers. So I asked most of my respondents their educational qualification.
Yes.
And as I told you right now, only one person was a graduate. That person was also working in a mining company in Jharkhand. Because of family situation, he had to come back and he was driving Uber. That was the only one person. Rest of them I would come from. So I have had people who work for travel agencies who were driving Uber because travel agencies have gone out of business. I've had people who were taxi drivers who are driving Uber now. I have people who were van drivers. They call it Chota Hathi, the Tata Matadors or the 407, the Matadors. They would drive that. They are driving Uber. And I have had people who have invested in cars. So earlier they had taxi, now they have bought Uber and they're now driving for Uber. Or earlier they had a garage, now they're so some form of association with the transport industry. Could be about the barriers that exist, the informal barriers that exist in navigating the transport industry of the city also. That could be something there in play, which I have not investigated, but it could be.
Okay, thank you. And for Madhuli was very keen to see me. Okay, I will start my video just for Mainul's sake, although I think just speaking should be enough. Stop. Where is my, can you see me now?
Thank you. Yes.
Madhu? Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Good seminar.
Zaad, you need to make me host. So if you can do that technically.
Sorry.
Sorry.
How do I do that? Just a second. I have never hosted a meeting and neither have I.
So the guest has become the host.
So wait. Could you tell me how?
Okay, don't worry. We will be losing time. Don't worry. That's fine. It's all right. So we have Prachi's questions on the chat box, and Prachi is suggesting, could you speak a little more about the differences between rating practices across different kinds of gig work, as in where the rating is automated, which is Uber, versus where it has to be actively solicited, which is Domino's delivery. I'm not very sure what does she mean, but she can actually give a demo in terms of if she speaks a little bit about that. And there's a lejud, like an addendum question, which is, how does this difference affect the ways in which the work is assessed and experienced? So solicited, I think what she means that sometimes Domino's suggests that you give me some rating and
it goes to your email or whatever. You have to take a few steps in order to do it, and you need not do it, but it makes a big difference to their thing. Whereas Uber, you book the next cab, you cannot get past that screen. You have to rate the driver and only then book it. So that's the
correct. We are into rating societies of Black Mirror.
China is already into rating society. We are thinking about it. China has already gone there. Thank you, Prachi, for that's a very, very good question. Thank you. So I rating is another part, and for most of the gig work, rating is integral to the experience of the work or the experience of the service. And even if you are absolutely correct that for Uber, you cannot book the next cab without doing the rating. But for, say, Zomato, you can go ahead and make your next food booking where you don't rate the valet. So there are differences. So Uber has this rating, which you rightly point out is kind of integrated, integral, automated into the system, because the rating actually allows them to maintain the control labor process. Whereas in Zomato, it is not like that. I haven't looked at Domino's because as I pointed out, that the marking the boundary of gig work was the first challenge that I faced, given that fragmented, contractual, short-term employment has become endemic. It's everywhere, even in the formal sector, which has no digital intermediation. That kind of, right now people have started even comparing, and I was reading this literature where how domestic work and gig work have the structural similarity, whereby you have these kinds of uh, uh, where it is individualized. You have services which you're selling your labor individualized. So there are similarities which can be teased between domestic work and the kind of work that is being done in the gig economy. Uh, Now, when I ask these workers about rating, the one response that I got, of course, I am not privy to the algorithm or the rating system and how it affects, because these are all proprietary softwares. Nobody is willing to talk about it. But all the workers pointed out that ratings affected their future job prospect, future job prospect. They argued that if the ratings came down, they felt that they had less number of riders. If the ratings came down, they did not get enough number of orders. But whereas if the ratings were high, they would seem to get more work. This is what they told me, and I think I have reasons to say, because if you look at the Uber app, uh, there is a kind of gamification that your rider has got 500 5-star ratings. He is great to talk to and everything, which the drivers can also see how well they are doing, and so that kind of thing. Whereas for Zomato, um, one may not do the rating, and they have also told us, or told me, that the rating affects the kind of work that they get, and that is why they insist whenever they deliver that we take the trouble of doing the rating. Now here there is a problem across platforms, whereas in Zomato I can be a very good worker, and because I do work to satisfaction of everyone, just satisfactory, nobody cares to give me a rating, because I uh, do that, because I do work to everybody's satisfaction. I'm not exceptional. If I'm bad, probably people take the trouble of rating me bad. Whereas in Uber, it is quite uniform. And so in Zomato, individual personalistic relationship and trying to be extra nice to the people you're delivering food, asking them to do the rating, is part of their entire work schedule. So every time you get a Zomato delivery, they will tell you softly that kindly give us a good rating. So yes, there is a difference, and how work is assessed and I can only talk about how work is experienced by these people. Regarding the assessment part, I really have no idea, because if you think about it, the rating is, let's talk about Uber. The rating is 5. The scale is 5, right? Now, people have told me that with low rating, people's driving contract or Uber license has been cancelled. Uber does not allow them to ride with them anymore. But I asked them, what is that mark? Is it 3.5? Is it 3? Is it 4? What is that? Nobody could answer me. That what is that threshold? What is considered good? What is considered? And of course, these are in the black box of Uber algorithm. The drivers also don't know them, but they know people who have been barred by Uber because their ratings went down. one driver told me that once his rating came down to 4 and he was not getting enough rides, but over time, as his rating came up to around 4.5, now he gets a lot of rides. Now, how does the algorithm actually provide rides is something that I don't know. The drivers also don't know. So they have all these narratives which we can tease out and how they think about rating, but we don't know. Seriously, I don't know.
We have a question from Shonita, and she has
Correct.
already written the question. So
Yes, I've read it.
yeah.
I've read it. Shonita, if I try to be precise, of course there is a demographic divide in terms of the two constituencies. If you don't believe me, just go out and check the yellow taxi drivers. Out of if you see 10, eight of them would be old, and one reason why I've spoken to taxi drivers, I was talking about the autonomy dimension, but there is also this dimension about the inability to make that switch to technology, as well as making this switch to this new mode of working. Okay, so this is one. So there is a demographic divide. Uber drivers are relatively younger compared to taxi drivers.
Right.
Uber drivers are relatively more amenable to technology because they have to use the mobile phones and everything. And within the taxi industry, you're absolutely right to use the word classes of labor, because within the taxi industry, we have two classes of labor now. And not only two, because the two are between the traditional taxi and Uber. And within Uber, we have three classes, right, who are associated with Uber. One is the rentier, petty capitalist, the owner of the car who doesn't drive. The other is the driver cum owner. He drives, so he's akin to a petty commodity producer. And lastly is the driver, who is the worker. The similar kind of division exists in the taxi industry, where you have the taxi owner driver, and then you have these people who just rent out their cabs for money. So yes, there are these differences in brief.
So are they also losing jobs when they're making the shift from the traditional taxi sectors to the Uber sectors with regard to the grappling of the technology aspect? Like,
So
yeah.
anyways, see, losing jobs, the point is, anyways, in taxi industry also, there was no security, no job. It
Yeah.
was self-employment. Right. Here it is also a self-employment, but here at least the self-employment is premised with a certain degree of security about the number of rides, a certain security about passengers, because you don't have to go and find passengers. Yeah, the passengers come, they come on your mobile phone, and so there is a switch happening, but some people are unable to make switch. People who have invested in taxi and who have a taxi loan are the ones who are not making the switch, even if they see there is prospect in Uber, because they have already made a financial commitment. So not losing out, but yes, there is difference. We can talk about this later also. I'll have to go back and see my transcripts about the differences.
Okay, Zaad, I have three questions actually.
I'll
Three.
write it down and we can discuss this later. Everybody,
No, but we have time, this is fine.
yeah,
I don't know.
Please.
One is first the technical part. So the rating thing, the rating thing is not just on behalf of the drivers, but also on the behalf of the consumers or the
Correct.
riders.
Correct.
Now, and if your rating is below 4.5, then just like the drivers, you will also get less priority in terms of how the algorithm works, because the algorithm is directly connected to the rating or vice versa. There is some kind of interlinkages. So if you have a good rating, then obviously you will get priority in terms of, you will get taxis which will be nearby, and so these are issues, right? So that is something which is beyond a control as far as the algorithmic allocation is concerned, because sometimes the rider and the driver, they have a mutual agreement. They think that you give me 5-star, I give you 5-star. We both mutually we just benefit from each other, because the ratings, both of our ratings will actually increase. But the problem lies in terms of the location where the rider or the driver are located, because there are certain places in the city where the probability of getting a ride from the point of view of both the driver as well as the rider are higher than other parts of the city. And it also has certain things on timing as well. So it's certain parts of the city, so at certain times you have office time, and then you have this night out time, so these are party times. So these are certain things, just like the days that you mentioned in terms of Friday and Sunday, timings are also important. So this is something which, but you can actually think over to, in not only in terms of the but it will actually may enrich your paper if the technical part is taken into account by interviewing some Uber management or technical staff. You know, if you have some access, they would.
I tried when I was associated with Oxford University, so I used the Oxford University name, but
They didn't.
Uber, Ola,
trade secrets.
Nobody was willing to give me anything on record. Nobody was also willing to talk to me whereby I can say I spoke to somebody from Uber. So it has to be like those secret things where you find someone and get. Yes, I tried, but that's a good point. I agree with you that there are geographies within the city also where this kind of mobility, and of course when I'm using mobility, Prachi has left, but of course the mobility is also in terms of increased mobility which Uber accords given these geographies, but the barriers still remain. So your point actually could be used in terms of thinking about precarious mobility, whereby Uber accords greater mobility to both the driver and the rider. But yes, there are precarious areas of the city where still those mobilities. So it could be thought of.
For example, my entire experience in the last 6-7 years in this city is that, but when this particular this app-based things have now emerged, and when we started using, is at a certain point of time, certain deliveries like Domino's, they didn't deliver on certain places, but now the business is such, and that they are now, they will deliver, but because of a delivery boy, and then you can actually, there are also other issues. So, but that is one. But the second is that even when you are in the cab, people will ask you, where are you going, or where will you go? Which is actually not the protocol, because that's the Uber drivers or Ola drivers who shouldn't ask. But once you say that I'm going there, they will automatically cancel it, or they won't, or this whole refusal thing, or this refusal thing which happens for the yellow cab, that can also happen here. You see, so those things are, it's not just a precarious mobility, but at the same time precarious living. So the neighborhoods, because there is uneven geographical development of the city also, and it might be true for any city, but Calcutta is something which we have direct experience. So apart from that, another technical part is that since the Uber or Ola, they follow, or even Zomato or all these delivery apps, they follow Google Maps now, and all the GPS is essentially based on Google Maps, because but in the Google Maps, the one-way driving thing is not there. Now, I have written to their portals and to their platforms, and they always say that it's a very nice suggestion. I said that, you just need to take the data from the official, transport ministry of each city or whoever is their authority, because every city they have a head office, and you can just update it into your system or just transfer it to Google, and they can say that, okay, so 1 p.m. to 10 p.m. is this one way. So because it actually makes your life more easier and hassle free, because sometimes since the one way drive is not being there, you can actually get an Uber which will actually is there near your location but on the other side of the road, or maybe on the parallel road. Okay.
Correct.
and 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 if actually this particular data is put into both Google and then the Uber or any other who takes Google data, then it actually enhances a lot of it actually becomes hassle free. It saves time, fuel, lot of issues, because sometimes you are in a traffic because you are on the other side and you have to actually take a long U-turn because the dividers are there, and in most of the Indian cities you have dividers. So this is this issue which I don't know whether Uber is taking into account or not, but no, I've written several times and they always say that it's a nice suggestion, we'll take care of that, but I don't know. But linked to this, my larger question, which is a more political economic question, that because they share Google Map or Google Maps, so Google is a bigger platform than, of course, Uber or Ola and all, because so how this whole rent extraction is taking place. So how the Google platforms as well as these platforms are essentially then rent seeking platforms instead of a profit thing, because any business, because the surplus value, the three forms of surplus value that Marx taught us, interest, rent, and profit. So here the rent component is much higher than anything else. Even if you, when this Uber takes this 25% cut, and there have been all this mediation of the government of late, where this, because sometimes they used to charge 40%, 50%, there was huge thing. And the example that you said, that out of 225, 105 has been taken. So I don't know how that's fair. And, so one, this rent extraction part, and which is on the side of the Uber, as well as how the Uber also takes the Google data, and so they have some arrangement with Google, maybe, or Google is getting some kind of revenue out of this rent seeking thing.
I think I am not privy to this. I'll be honest with you. I'm not privy to the information about Uber and Google, but of course the point about Google is that every mobile phone which is using Google is data for Google, possible to sell that. So given that subsumption and datafication is not operating only with the worker there is a bigger structure there where Google and Facebook is converting all of us into data and something to be sold. So I agree with that point. One, they use Google platform, they use Google Mobile, Google Maps, and there is some kind of problem also there, particularly with cities in the global south, because as you were rightly pointing out, Google Maps are not very precise for our liking, whereby road names, building numbers are different and difficult at certain locations, and so the maps are often wrong. This is also true. Yeah. The maps are often wrong, and there, what we can see here again is that within the Uber drivers, some drivers, and this is something that the Uber drivers shared with me, that some drivers prefer to stick to the Google map and follow that route because it is safe. Even if they go wrong, they can always tell the company and the owner, I followed the route. Whereas more experienced drivers, taxi drivers, like Durga Das, who had been driving for 20 years cabs in the city of Kolkata, he said that every time somebody starts, it's only when they accept the ride and start it, then they get the destination, right? And he said, I always ask the passenger, the rider, that do you want to follow map, or do you are you telling, will you tell me which route to take? So I give them the option. And sometimes he was jokingly saying that, sometimes people think that if we take our route, we are trying to fleece the driver, the rider. But in Google, the fare is fixed prior, uh, based on the. So the point is, the value of the trip is actually determined by Google Map algorithm, because the value is decided prior, and it only changes a little bit given the distance. So he said that people sometimes think that we are trying to fleece them like the old taxi drivers, जो घुमाते रहता था, but यहाँ पे वो सब नहीं होता है, but Google गलत दिखाता है, और जो लोग, so and there also I'll tell, this is related to Shonita's question. The older taxi drivers, even if they're riding Uber, they have particular locations in the city during hours of the day where they would like to be, because the refusal thing actually is originating from the very simple fact that if somebody takes a taxi and goes to, say, Goria, then even if, and this is the experience, that even if they sit there for 2 hours, they might not get a ride back from Goria to the center of the city. So all of these dynamics have started to take its toll, because the number of the number of taxis has increased, the incentives have declined. And so all the natural operation of markets, which Uber actually somehow managed by giving money to the driver and giving us low cost ride, that is disappearing. Today, if you calculate, a yellow taxi is cheaper than Uber any day. Right now, that is the dynamics. So it is an ever evolving situation.
Yeah. So finally, so as far as the, this, since you also work on trade unions and bargaining and also, so what's the scenario of this taxi trade union? It seems that there is a greater divide
Correct.
between the yellow cab
I'll give you an example.
union and the Uber union, which is there but very nascent stage. They are not that, people don't have, and precisely because of this false consciousness or whatever this Prachi was saying, and because of your precarious mobility thing, they think that, okay, this is my car. So, and in fact, with Virat Kohli in campaigning, so even the rider thinks that it's his or her car, and the driver also thinks that it's his or her car, and mutually benefiting kind of so there is an equilibrium there, and yeah.
There is an equilibrium, there are conflicts, whereas the rider thinks that because Uber says everyone's own car, so the rider thinks this is my own car for the time being, whereas the driver is sitting there and thinking, I have invested 8 lakhs on this Maruti, this is my car, so you are just a rider. So yes, there are the dynamics between the rider and the driver, if possible, as an ethnographic work, which I can't do, as you know, but the very dynamics of each Uber ride itself would be fascinating. Regarding the trade unions, I'll give you an example because Shagnik, Shagnik. Shagnik was trying to organize Zomato drivers in the district of North 24 Parganas. He managed to get 70 odd people to sign in, and drafted their charter of demand about long work hours, reducing the work hours and stuff like that. Charted their, and went to the Labor Commissioner, North 24 Pargana, Barashat. The Labor Commissioner was receptive, understanding, realized everything, and he said, I am with you. So everything, the state is with you. The workers, 70 odd workers are there, you are organized. And the Labor Commissioner sent a letter to one of these big companies which does food delivery and asked their manager to come and meet. All 72 lost their job, all of them. And it took them 3 days to get the names, identify them. All of them lost their jobs. And you cannot show that they have lost their jobs because they don't get any more jobs. And so he was lamenting the fact that what do you do? Earlier, he was telling me, you all write and you say the state is not supporting, workers are not organized. Whenever, even if you manage to get both of these conditions, just the situation, the size of capital, the power of capital, the rate of unemployment, the lack of any social security actually makes it such an abysmal condition that trade unionism and work, what I have found instead is that Uber drivers and these Zomato workers have WhatsApp groups. These are locality-wise WhatsApp groups. They share information amongst each other. They share other job opportunities amongst each others. So you have not organization in the political form, but some kind of social support network. Because one thing, and this is the last thing I want to tell you, is that in case they can't fulfill the incentives, they have devised methods to cheat the system. And in that method, they have, so for example, you need to do 110 rides, 60 rides, you are stuck at 59. 4 a.m. Friday morning is the deadline. 4 a.m. Friday morning, you have to do 60 rides by that time, and you're stuck at 59. So what do? You ask a friend, you take that friend, drive towards a little desolate spot at that hour, but believable, say Eastern Metropolitan Bypass, and you ask the friend to book a ride. You ensure no cars are there, and once they book a ride, it is a ride worth say 50 or 60 rupees or 70 rupees, but it ensures that you get all the incentive and you pass the favor. So there is a network whereby you are trying to live by cheating the system. So you have these networks, but politically in the form of trade unions, as we understand, talking about rights and articulation, that seems to be a far cry, at least till now.
Yeah, so that's where you're absolutely. So that's where, in terms of this whole riding and allocation, that's what it was related to my first question, is that then it seems to be a kind of a story of good luck, bad luck capitalism. So if you are, there is this whole element of luck factor, and there's a huge literature in political theory about luck. So you can, Ronald Dworkin and also they have quite engaged with that kind of work. That so what is the role of luck in your life so in terms of how because this apart from your location, where your car is located, where and the algorithmic thing, you don't know, because the systems you are not controlling. You can manage and manipulate a little bit in terms of target, in terms of achieving the target. Sometimes they cancel you and make you pay, actually, because there is also other ways of maneuvering. Those things are there, and if you're a conscious rider, then you can pursue and then you can complain.
Yeah,
then
otherwise they get,
but exactly, so otherwise they will. So this is, so then it's a kind of this whole luck and capitalism kind of a story, that you don't have enough bargaining power because of huge unemployment, and at the same time the labor movement have weakened, and the structure of work has actually changed. So it's no more a work under a common factory shade, where you can actually have more leverage to bargain with the employer. So there is this interesting. So then it seems that, okay, there's a luck thing, but at the same time, what do the parties who actually care for labor, or traditionally left parties and all? So what would be the nature of mobilization which is a strategic question in the 21st century, because this is something going to be the future, because with robotics and artificial intelligence, there will be more technology-based jobs, and there will be more. So it's a kind of a, I say that's a job loss growth instead of a job less growth, of course, but it's a job loss growth also, because a lot of people cannot be, it's just unemployable, because so the quantum of surplus population will actually increase over time, because robotics and these people, these will take care of most of the work. And so then we come down to the point of then basic universal basic income and all sort of things, because otherwise there is hardly any mobilization based kind of movement that usually 20th century left politics was quite was expertise. But now in the 21st century, the very core and the backbone of the left movement, which is precisely the trade union movement, the structure of economy and the structure of politics is such that it's now unable to make any breakthrough.
I agree with you, but again, Moidul, I would just like to point out one more thing, is that maybe Kolkata is not the ideal location to locate it, because I think at one level, yes, this automation and job loss is a reality, but at the other level, the issue is that the work that is being done, the value that is being generated, the people who are doing the work, those are geographically they can be located geographically. There is also an absence of regulation, right? You have no regulation. So for example, for the taxi industry, you have today in America, because of these kinds of proliferation of gig economy and other things, and people working 2 or 3 jobs and still not making a living, now they have raised the minimum income, and gig economy has come inside the minimum income. So for example, in the new labor code, even that rubbish labor code which the government has implemented, amongst the many bad things, the one good thing, and I have to admit this, is that they incorporated, not categorically, clearly, but they incorporated gig labor within that labor code. So the one response is, of course, this is a bigger phenomena. There is a movement of capital, production, global structures, and there are huge things which are beyond our control immediately. But the one thing that we can strive for, we can work for, we can fight for, is the regulatory oversight. One reason why the gig economy is so haphazard is the lack of regulation. Of course, this is a new phenomena. Governments, societies take time to respond. But this is just my take, is that the demand is about regulation. That this is also work, and this work, because it does not fit the standard employer-employee workman definition under the Factories Act or the Industrial Disputes Act, you have nothing to do. Bring a regulation, bring them under regulation. All labor should be subject to some regulation. That is, for the time being, that could be the political project. That is the political project. This is my take. It's like, we don't have regulation. If forget the universal basic income, because I not forget, because that is the demand. That should be the demand. I'm just saying, for the time being, what about minimum wage across India for all kinds of jobs? That is the demand. That I should make a minimum wage. Whatever job I do, there is a minimum wage. The minimum wage is only for particular industries, that too notified by governments, that too by different state governments according to their wish. That cannot be, because economies have become complicated, jobs have become complicated. Today, bidi worker is not the only informal worker in the economy. In West Bengal law, you only find the bidi worker and some other workers as the informal workers. So that could be one way. I just thinking about it. But I want to thank you for this opportunity, thinking about it. The questions were great. I have to think about it. I will
Thank you.
call you. I will call you because I want to pick your brains about framing the papers, like how many
Okay.
papers to frame
Sure.
and where, because I had too many arguments. So we'll talk about this. But thank you so much, and
Thank
thank
you.
you, Professor Ray and Varshana Basu. Uh, Thank you, Prachi, and everyone for the questions.
Thank you. Okay. See
Okay.
you. We
See you.
too.